If you've wandered into this corner of the internet looking for something calm, unhurried, and just a little dusty with the scent of history, you're in the right place. Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. We take our time here. We speak softly, tread lightly, and let the past unfold like an old parchment unrolled at the edge of a candle flame. So, if you'd like more of these long, slow journeys through time where nothing rushes and no one hurries, you consider subscribing, so you can drift away to history whenever you need it. But for now, just settle in, loosen your shoulders, let your breathing slow. We're going to a wedding. Not the glittering spectacle of modern celebrations with photographers and champagne, but something older, quieter, and far stranger. We're stepping into the medieval world, a place where a wedding is not only the joining of two people, but the weaving of entire families, the merging of livelihoods, and sometimes, if we're honest, the careful sealing of a bargain. It is early morning in a small village somewhere in England, perhaps in the 14th century. A soft mist clings low over the fields, wrapping the thatched rooftops in pale grey gauze. The air smells faintly of wet earth and wood smoke, the kind of smell that promises both warmth and dampness in equal measure. The road underfoot is little more than packed dirt, rutted from wagon wheels and softened by last night's rain. Somewhere in the distance, a cock crows once, then again, as if to remind the whole village that it is, indeed, morning. You can hear the sound of church bells, not loud and clear like in an empty countryside, but muffled slightly by the fog, as though the air itself is in no hurry to carry the sound. They are not ringing fast. These are not alarm bells. These are slow, steady chimes, marking the hour, calling people to gather. As you walk, you pass low cottages with open shutters. Here and there, a face peers out, a curious neighbor, perhaps already half-dressed for the occasion. Most are villagers in simple tunics or woolen dresses, people who have known the bride and groom for years. They know the families, the land, the bargains struck. They know that today is as much a day for the village as it is for the couple. There is no wide paved street, no flower-strewn carpet. Instead, there's a narrow path leading uphill toward the stone church, worn smooth by years of footsteps, funerals, baptisms, feast days, and, on rare occasions like this, weddings. Along the way, you notice small details. A child carrying a small posy of herbs, lavender, rosemary, maybe a sprig of rue, her bare feet, damp from the grass, though she doesn't seem to mind. Two older men leaning against a fence, speaking in low voices, likely about the livestock or the weather, rather than the wedding itself. A woman, younger, walking briskly with a basket covered in linen, perhaps a contribution to the feast that will come later. The closer you get to the church, the more people join the path. Some travel alone, others in small clusters, their voices weaving together in a low, steady hum. There is laughter here and there, but even that is muted by the morning air. The church itself is not grand, squat and sturdy, built of rough-hewn stone. Its walls thick and its windows narrow to keep out the winter winds. The bell tower rises above it like a watchful guardian, and the wooden door is already open. Standing just outside is the priest, dressed in vestments, nothing overly fine, but clean and carefully kept. His face is weathered, the kind of face you see on someone who spends as much time in the fields as in prayer. Near him, a small group of men are gathered, one of them broad-shouldered, wearing a tunic of better quality than most is likely the groom. He stands straight, though his hands shift restlessly, betraying either nerves or impatience. A few feet away, the bride approaches. She does not arrive alone. Two women walk with her, perhaps sisters or cousins, their hands adjusting the folds of her dress as they move. She wears no white, there is no such tradition yet, but instead, a gown of deep green wool, the hem just brushing the tops of her shoes. The sleeves are long and slightly flared, edged with simple embroidery. Around her waist is a narrow belt of braided cord. Her hair is covered by a linen veil, pinned in place with care, though a few strands have slipped free in the morning damp. People gather closer now. There is no rush, for the ceremony will begin only when everyone who needs to be present has arrived. Children weave between legs. A dog barks once and is hushed. The smell of damp stone mixes with the faint aroma of someone's breakfast, perhaps oatcakes or a stew left to simmer before the day's events began. And as you stand there, watching this small crowd form, it becomes clear that this is not a performance for strangers. It is a binding, a public joining, witnessed by those who will live with the consequences. These people will see the couple every day. They will hear their arguments, watch their children grow, and help them in times of need. The wedding is as much for the village as it is for the two people at the center of it. The bells ring again, slower now, each toll rolling out into the mist. Somewhere, a cart rattles over stones, bringing perhaps a few latecomers from the next hamlet over. The priest raises his hand in a small gesture, and the chatter quiets. This is the moment before the beginning. Not yet the vows, not yet the feast, but that suspended stillness where everyone draws close and the air feels almost different. And here, at the edge of this moment, we will pause. Because before we step into the vows and the blessings, before we watch the bride and groom take their places, it is worth asking, how did they get here? What rules allowed this marriage? What customs shaped it? What bargains were struck before anyone walked up this muddy path? That is where our story will take us next. But for now, let the bells fade into the mist, the church door wait half open, and the couple stand ready but not yet wed. Sleep if you like, or stay with me as we walk slowly into the next part of the story. In the medieval world, the question of who could marry whom was not left to chance or personal desire alone, and certainly not left to the wandering whims of romance the way we often imagine it today. No, in those centuries, love might be a pleasant bonus if it appeared, but it was rarely the deciding factor, for marriage was above all a contract, a negotiation, a careful weaving of obligations and permissions, and for most people, these rules set by church, by custom, by the invisible threads of feudal duty, were as unyielding as the stone walls of the parish church itself. Which means that before any vows were spoken, before any rings were exchanged or feasts prepared, someone had to determine whether the bride and groom were even allowed to stand before the priest at all. The first and most important gatekeeper in this matter was the church, and not merely the local priest who knew everyone by name, but the entire structure of canon law, a sprawling and complicated set of rules that extended from the papal court in Rome to the smallest rural chapel. It was the church that decided what counted as marriage, who was free to marry, and crucially, who was forbidden. One of the most significant restrictions, and the one that often caused headaches in small, tightly knit communities, was the prohibition against marrying within a certain degree of kinship. Now, when we say kinship, you might think only of siblings or first cousins. But in medieval canon law, the net was cast far wider sometimes, as far as 7 degrees of separation, which could stretch back generations, meaning that to people who shared a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-parent could technically be considered too closely related to wed. And while that might sound absurd to modern ears in a village where families had intermarried over centuries, it was entirely possible for half the eligible population to be connected in some way if you traced the family trees far enough. Of course, this created both problems and opportunities. Problems because it could block desirable matches, opportunities because the rule could be bent if one had the resources or influence to obtain a dispensation from the church, a formal permission that essentially said, yes, these two are technically too closely related, but we will allow it anyway, often granted in exchange for a suitable donation or political favor. The church's reach extended further still, for marriage could not take place if either party was already bound by a previous union, which, given the strict Christian definition of marriage as meant that divorce in the modern sense was almost unheard of. Only an annulment, declaring that a marriage had never been valid in the first place, could free someone to marry again, and these were difficult to obtain unless one was wealthy or well-connected. Another major restriction lay in the matter of consent, and here medieval law held something both surprisingly progressive and deeply problematic by modern standards. Technically, both bride and groom had to consent to the marriage for it to be valid, which sounds noble and romantic until one realizes that this consent could be spoken under intense family pressure, and that the church often considered even a private exchange of vows without witnesses to be binding, if both parties agreed, meaning that two young people whispering promises in a field could, in the eyes of the law, be just as married as if they had stood before the altar. And yet, while the church insisted on mutual consent, in practice families, especially among the nobility, were the true architects of marriage, arranging matches to secure alliances, merge estates or settle disputes, sometimes betrothing children years before they were old enough to understand the bargain being struck on their behalf. Class 2 was a significant barrier. while in theory a man could marry a woman from a different social rank. In practice, such unions were rare and often frowned upon, for marriage was a way of maintaining the social order, keeping wealth and land within certain circles, and ensuring that children inherited not only property but also status. Among peasants, the rules were simpler in some ways, but still bound by the invisible chains of feudal obligation. A serf might require the permission of his lord to marry, especially if the marriage involved moving to another estate, for lords considered their tenants not merely as free individuals, but as part of the working assets of the manor. Marrying outside one's parish also introduced layers of bureaucracy, for the church required the reading of the banza public announcement of the intended marriage on 3 consecutive Sundays, giving the community time to voice any objections, such as a hidden prior engagement, a secret vow of celibacy, or a forbidden blood relation. And while this process seems quaint, it served as both social regulation and public spectacle, for people loved nothing more than to whisper about who was marrying whom, and whether it was truly proper. And then there were the less official but no less powerful customs that shaped marriage eligibility. Dowries, for instance, could determine whether a match was possible at all, since a bride's family was expected to provide goods, money, or land to help establish the new household, and without a suitable dowry, even the most willing couple might find themselves unable to proceed. In noble circles, the stakes were higher, still dowries could be vast, and they were often accompanied by elaborate marriage contracts, spelling out what would happen to property if the husband died, what rights the wife would retain, and how any children would inherit, turning what might appear as a celebration of love into a transaction as meticulously calculated as a business merger. In some cases, political alliances outweighed all other considerations, leading to matches between near strangers from different countries, conducted through messengers and sealed by treaties rather than by shared affection. But even among common folk, the choice of partner was rarely entirely free. It was hemmed in by kinship, parish boundaries, economic capacity, and the unspoken but ever-present weight of communal opinion. A couple might love each other dearly, but if the union was seen as socially mismatched, financially impractical, or legally forbidden, they would find themselves in a tangle of obstacles that could delay or even prevent the wedding entirely. And so, before any medieval couple found themselves standing at the church door, surrounded by neighbors and waiting for the priest's blessing, they had already navigated a complex landscape of law, custom, and expectation, each step bringing them closer to that moment in the mist when the bells began to ring. It is easy to think of marriage as something that begins with a proposal, but in the Middle Ages it began long before that, sometimes in the quiet calculations of a family ledger, sometimes in the whispered negotiations between two households, and always under the watchful eye of the church, which claimed not only the authority to bless a marriage, but the power to forbid it. This is why, when we imagine that bride in her green wool gown and the groom waiting beside the priest, we must also imagine all the unseen hands that have guided them there, the relatives who weighed the advantages and risks, the priest who confirmed their eligibility, the Lord who may have given his consent, and the community that will soon gather to witness their vows. They are not simply two people in love. They are the final product of a long chain of permissions, bargains, and rules. And knowing that makes the next step in our journey into the actual negotiations of betrothal law the more fascinating. For now that we know who could marry whom, we can begin to see how those matches were made, not in the fleeting heat of passion, but in the slow, deliberate weaving of medieval life. In the medieval world, before the bells rang and the couple stood at the church door, there was a quieter but no less significant stage of the wedding journey, one that often took place in kitchens with low-burning hearths, in the shadowed corners of manor halls, or in the open air of a lord's courtyard. The betrothal and the negotiations that surrounded it. For a marriage was not something sprung into existence overnight, and in most cases it began as a deliberate arrangement, slowly shaped over weeks or months, sometimes even years, until the day came when the match was deemed ready for the public ceremony. Among nobles, these negotiations could begin when the prospective bride and groom were still children, for what mattered most was not present affection but future advantage. A nobleman with lands to his name might seek a bride whose dowry would expand those lands, or whose family connections would strengthen his position at court, and the girl's family, in turn, would seek a groom of appropriate rank whose household could offer security and influence. Even among common folk, where the stakes were smaller in scale but no less important, a match was rarely left to chance. Families would weigh the practicalities, whether the groom had enough land to farm, whether the bride was skilled in the household arts, whether the two parishes were close enough for families to visit easily, and whether the match would bring benefit or burden to the extended kin. Dowries were at the heart of these talks, and though we often imagine dowries as glittering chests of gold or parcels of fine cloth, in most rural settings they were far humbler. Perhaps a cow, a small plot of land, a few pieces of household furniture, or even a quantity of grain or seed to help the new household through its first year. Yet even these modest contributions could make the difference between a marriage that could proceed and one that could not. For without the necessary resources, a couple might find themselves unable to set up a home of their own. In noble households, the dowry could be a matter of intense calculation, written into formal contracts witnessed by clerks and sealed with wax, specifying not only what the bride brought to the marriage, but also what would happen to those goods if she were widowed, how any children would inherit, and in some cases even outlining the obligations of the groom toward his new wife's kin. The betrothal itself could take many forms. In some regions was marked by a formal ceremony known as handfasting, where the couple's hands were literally bound together with a cord or strip of cloth, while they made promises to marry in the future. In others, it was a simpler verbal agreement made in front of witnesses, often sealed with the exchange of a token, a ring, a coin, or even a knife as a sign of commitment. In the eyes of the church, a betrothal was a serious matter, though it was not the same as marriage. Breaking it without cause could lead to disputes, and in some cases to lawsuits for a promise to marry, was seen as a binding contract, and a jilted party could demand the return of gifts or compensation for a broken engagement. For the couple themselves, the betrothal might be the first time they spent any real time together, though even then, propriety dictated that their meetings be supervised, especially if they were of higher status. Love might grow in these months, but so might tension, particularly if one party found the other lacking in charm, skill, or appearance. In villages, the negotiations might be carried out less formally, but with no less seriousness. Two fathers meeting over ale to discuss the exchange of goods, a mother quietly sounding out the character of the intended groom's family, neighbors passing along subtle information about a person's work habits or temper. Sometimes the match was entirely practical, the young man needing a wife to help manage his home, and the young woman needing a husband to provide for her, and in these cases the betrothal might be short arranged in winter so that the marriage could take place before the demands of spring planting. But other times, especially when land or property was at stake, the betrothal could stretch out, with negotiations delayed over the precise terms of inheritance or the timing of the wedding feast. Gifts often played a role, not merely as symbols of affection, but as tangible signs of the agreement. A bolt of cloth sent from the groom's household to the bride, a small chest of spices, a carved wooden comb, or a simple brooch might mark the understanding that the marriage was set. These gifts, like the tokens exchanged at the handfasting, could be called back if the arrangement fell apart. A reminder that marriage in the Middle Ages was as much a financial and social arrangement as a personal one. The church, for its part, had its own rules about betrothals. Priests encouraged couples to make them publicly to avoid secret engagements that might lead to scandal, and they urged families to ensure that both bride and groom gave their consent freely, though what counted as freely could be stretched thin when parents or guardians applied subtle or not so subtle. In noble circles, betrothals could be political tools binding to rival houses together in peace, or cementing a vassal's loyalty to his lord. A king might betroth a young noblewoman to one of his favored knights as a reward for service, while in turn expecting that the knight's marriage would strengthen the crown's hold on a contested region. In such cases, the bride and groom themselves might meet only briefly, if at all, before the wedding day, their union determined by parchment and seal rather than shared glances or quiet conversations. And yet, for all the calculation and formality, there were moments in the betrothal process that could be tender, even romantic. The first shy smiles between a couple during a supervised walk, the exchange of a small gift, not because it was required, but because it was wanted, the slow realization that this person, chosen for you by family or fortune, might be someone you could come to care for. In rural communities, a betrothal could also be a public event, with neighbors congratulating the couple and offering small tokens or well wishes. In towns, it might be announced in the marketplace or posted on the church door, letting everyone know that the match was made and that the wedding would follow in due time. Of course, not all negotiations went smoothly. Disputes over dowry amounts, disagreements between families, or unexpected revelations about one party's past could derail the process, sometimes leading to heated arguments or the intervention of the parish priest to mediate. There were also cases where one party, having agreed in principle, found themselves reluctant to proceed, leading to quiet but urgent conversations behind closed doors. For breaking a betrothal could damage reputations and sour relations between families for years. In some rare instances, betrothals were made in childhood but broken in adulthood, when the grown individuals or their families found better matches. Though such changes were usually handled delicately to avoid public shame. Still, when the negotiations succeeded, the betrothal served as the foundation for everything that followed. The couple would begin to prepare for their life together, the bride's family gathering her dowry, the groom ensuring that his home was ready, both sides making arrangements for the feast, the music, and the ceremony itself. And so, in the weeks or months between the betrothal and the wedding, the couple lived in a state of expectation, their future sealed in words and tokens, yet still waiting for the day when the promises would be made before God and their community. If we think back to that morning mist in the village, the bride in her green wool gown, the groom waiting by the church door, we can now imagine all that has led to this moment. The quiet conversations by the fire, the careful weighing of dowry and inheritance, the clasp of hands at a hand fasting, the passing of a small token from one palm to another. It is easy to see only the wedding day itself, but without the betrothal and its negotiations, that day could never come, for it was here, in these early arrangements, that the marriage was truly made, piece by piece, word by word, until the path to the church was clear. And now that we have walked through the private world of promises and bargains, we can step next into the public world of the church's authority, where those promises will be tested against the rules of faith and law. For in the Middle Ages, a wedding could not stand without the blessing of the altar. In the medieval world, no matter how carefully a match was arranged, no matter how generous the dowry or how advantageous the alliance, no marriage was truly valid in the eyes of the community without the blessing of the church. For in those centuries, the church was not simply a place where people went on holy days or where the village gathered for Sunday Mass. It was the beating heart of the social order, the keeper of records, the guardian of morality, and the sole authority in matters of marriage, holding the belief deeply rooted and fiercely defended that the union of a man and a woman was a sacrament, a holy mystery ordained by God Himself, and thus could not be entered into lightly or dissolved at will. This meant that the church's role in a wedding was not confined to reciting prayers or offering blessings. It began long before the ceremony, in the careful verification of whether the couple was free to marry at all. A process that could involve the reading of the banns, those public announcements made on 3 consecutive Sundays in the parish churches of both the bride and groom, in which the priest declared the names of the betrothed and invited anyone with knowledge of a reason they could not lawfully wed to come forward. And here the reasons could be many: a prior marriage, a vow of celibacy, to close a blood relationship, or even a spiritual connection such as godparent to godchild, which the church considered a barrier as real as kinship by blood. The reading of the banns was not a mere formality. It was a safeguard against secret unions, a way of making the community complicit in ensuring that the marriage was lawful, and it also served as a kind of public notice board, letting neighbors whisper and speculate about the match, weighing its suitability according to both church law and local gossip. In some cases, if the couple came from different parishes, the banns had to be read in both, and the priest would require proof, often in the form of a written note or a trusted messenger, that this had been done, for without it the ceremony could not proceed. The church also oversaw the proper conduct of the betrothal period, warning against premarital intimacy, though such warnings were not always heeded, and in cases where the bride became visibly pregnant before the wedding, the priest might speed up the date of the ceremony to prevent public scandal, though this, too, was handled with varying degrees of leniency, depending on the parish and the social standing of those involved. On the day of the wedding itself, the church dictated not only the prayers and blessings to be spoken, but the very structure of the ceremony. For in much of the Middle Ages, the actual exchange of vows took place not inside the church, before the altar, but outside, at the church door, where the couple would stand before the priest, surrounded by witnesses, and declared their consent to marry. Only after this public declaration would they enter the church for a mass, during which they might receive a blessing. But the essential binding words were spoken in the open air, in front of the people who would hold them to their promises. The church also determined the language and form of these vows, ensuring that they included not only the promise to take one another as husband and wife, but also an acknowledgement of the roles each would play in the marriage, shaped by the theological and social norms of the time. Husbands as the heads of the household, wives as their helpmates, both bound to mutual fidelity and the raising of children in the faith. Rings, though not universally required, were encouraged, symbolizing the unbroken circle of marriage, and the priest would bless the ring before it was placed on the bride's finger, often with words invoking prosperity, health, and harmony. The church's involvement extended even to the choice of date for the wedding. For certain times of the year, particularly Lent and Advent, the seasons of fasting and preparation were considered inappropriate for celebrations, and so couples had to plan their marriages around the liturgical calendar, often choosing days that coincided with local feast days or harvest celebrations, which brought both practical and symbolic advantages. The priest's role as witness and guardian of the marriage also meant that records of the union were kept either in written form, where literacy allowed, or in oral tradition, supported by the collective memory of the parish. For in an age before centralized state record-keeping, the church's archives, however humble, were the closest thing to official documentation a marriage could have. Beyond the legalities, the church sought to frame marriage as a moral and spiritual duty, reminding the couple in sermons and confessions of their responsibilities to each other and to God, warning against sins that could undermine the sanctity of the union, such as infidelity, cruelty, or neglect of religious observance. Priests were expected to counsel couples before marriage, sometimes meeting with them privately to discuss their roles and obligations, though the depth and sincerity of this counseling varied greatly depending on the priest's character and the customs of the region. In towns and cities, where parishes were larger and more formal, the church's oversight could be stricter, with written permissions and recorded bans, while in rural hamlets, the priest might know the couple personally, having watched them grow up, and thus rely more on his own judgment and the testimony of neighbors. Yet even in the smallest parishes, the church's authority was unquestioned in principle, for without its blessing, a marriage was considered irregular, and the children of such a union could be deemed illegitimate, a status that carried serious social and legal consequences, particularly in matters of inheritance. This is why, even when couples were tempted to bypass the church, perhaps eloping in a private handfasting or exchanging vows without witnesses, they often later sought to have the union solemnized at the church door to ensure that it was recognized both in heaven and on earth. The church's role, then, was not simply to bless what had already been decided, but to shape, regulate, and sometimes even prevent marriages, standing as both gatekeeper and guardian of the institution. And in doing so, it wove the bonds of matrimony tightly into the fabric of Christian life. If we picture again that morning in the mist, the bride in her deep green gown, the groom in his well-kept tunic, the priest waiting by the church door, we now understand that this moment is not merely the start of their life together. It is the culmination of a process overseen at every step by the church, from the reading of the banns to the choice of day, from the wording of the vows to the blessing of the ring, and without this oversight, the day would be incomplete, the union unrecognized. And so as the bells finish their slow peal, and the murmuring of the gathered crowd fades into expectant silence, we can step forward with the couple into the next part of their journey, choosing the day itself, not by whim but with an eye to the seasons, the saints, and the superstitions that shaped medieval life. For in the Middle Ages, even the calendar could be an invisible guest at the wedding feast. By the time the morning sun has lifted itself high enough to catch the tops of the church's worn stones, the preparations inside the bride's chamber have become a slow dance of hands, fabric, and whispered excitement, a ritual as important as the ceremony itself. For in the medieval world, what one wore on their wedding day was not only a matter of beauty, but of meaning, and each stitch, each layer, each color told a story of wealth, family standing, and tradition. The room smells faintly of wool, linen, and the lingering scent of lavender sachets tucked into chests months earlier to keep the moths at bay. The light filtering through the narrow window in pale, golden stripes that fall across the wooden floorboards and illuminate the gown laid out like a treasured relic. There is no expectation of white, no universal demand for a color meant to symbolize purity. That idea would not become fashionable until centuries later. So, the medieval bride is free to be wrapped in deep reds, dyed from madder root, rich blues drawn from costly woad, or soft golds that catch the light like a field of ripened wheat, the shades chosen according to what the family could afford, what the season allowed, and what dyes could be sourced from merchants or traveling dyers passing through the market square. The fabric itself is often the truest signal of wealth. Fine silk imported through long and dangerous trade routes from the east might grace the shoulders of a noble bride, its surface shimmering with every small movement, while a bride of humbler means might wear sturdy wool, carefully brushed and smoothed, or linen that had been spun and woven by the women of her own household. For the wealthy fur trim along the sleeves or hem might offer both status and warmth. Especially in colder months, the pelts of squirrel, ermine or fox sewn in narrow strips so that each tiny patchwork piece adds to the sense of opulence. The gown's shape is dictated by the irretight sleeves laced along the forearm, a bodice that narrows at the waist, a skirt that falls in graceful folds to the ground, but the fit is rarely achieved by tailoring as we know it today. Instead, it is accomplished with laces and ties, adjustable to the body and to the passage of seasons and years. Over her gown, the bride might wear a surcoat or overgown, sometimes open at the sides to show off the fabric beneath, and in noble families this outer layer could be embroidered with threads of silver or gold, worked by patient hands into patterns of leaves, vines, or heraldic symbols that declare the union of two houses. The embroidery itself might have been done months in advance, perhaps by a group of women sitting together in long winter evenings, their needles dipping in and out of the fabric in a rhythm older than memory. Her hair, depending on local custom and her social standing, might be braided and wrapped around her head like a crown, or left loose to fall down her back as a sign of maidenhood. Though in some places, a married woman was expected to cover her hair completely, so the act of veiling it for the first time during the wedding could be as symbolic as the vows themselves. The veil might be of fine silk gauze if her family was well off, or of lighter linen if they were not, and it could be pinned with small decorative brooches or circlets of metal, bronze, silver, or even gold each, carefully polished so they gleam in the candlelight. Jewelry is chosen with care, though in many cases it is not newly bought, but drawn from the family's own collection. Pieces passed down from mothers and grandmothers, worn not only for beauty, but as talismans against ill fortune. And among the wealthiest families, a bride might wear a girdle or belt adorned with enamel work or gemstones, a visible display of her family's prosperity. The groom's attire is no less considered, though perhaps less spoken of in the whispers of the women preparing him. His tunic might be made from the same costly fabrics. If he is of high birth, the colors chosen to complement the bride's, so that the two are a matched pair before the eyes of both heaven and earth. And over his tunic he might wear a mantle or cloak clasped at the shoulder with a decorative brooch, the clasp itself sometimes a gift from his new wife's family. His hose are fitted, his boots polished, and if he is a man of means, his belt is decorated to match his station, often a gift that will remain with him for life. The groom's hair might be trimmed neatly or left longer according to fashion, his beard or mustache combed and scented with a touch of oil. For while medieval men might not have had mirrors as we do, they understood the importance of appearing well kept on such a day. In some cases, both bride and groom might wear garlands of flowers or herbs, rosemary for remembrance, myrtle for love, perhaps a sprig of rue for protection, woven together into crowns or tucked into sleeves and bodices. The fresh green scent mingling with the smell of clean linen and the faint, lingering aroma of hearth smoke from the morning's fire. The attendants fuss quietly over the details, adjusting the fall of the bride's sleeve, straightening the fold of the groom's cloak, making sure that no thread is out of place, for they know that every eye in the village will be upon them when they step into the daylight. In wealthier weddings, the garments themselves could be so valuable that they would be carefully stored away afterward, perhaps worn only on other great feast days, or handed down as heirlooms to be remade or altered for future generations. while for poorer couples the wedding clothes might simply be their best set of garments worn again for church. On Sundays and important gatherings, the memory of the day lingering more in the stories told than in the preservation of the fabric. But no matter the station, the act of dressing for the wedding is a transformation, a slow shedding of the everyday self in exchange for the figure who will stand before the priest and the gathered witnesses, a figure shaped not just by cloth and thread, but by the hopes of two families, the unspoken weight of tradition, and the shared knowledge that once these garments are set aside at day's end, a new life will have begun. Outside, the bells might already be ringing faintly, carried on the breeze, and the first guests might be arriving in the yard. But here, in the stillness of the chamber, the last ties are pulled snug, the last pins set, the last glances exchanged in the mirror of each other's eyes before the doors are opened and the day truly begins. By the time the church bells have rung their first welcoming peals, the village has already begun to hum with the kind of energy that only comes with a wedding, a mingling of excitement, curiosity, and the quiet undercurrent of gossip that binds a small community together. For in the medieval world, a wedding is not merely the union of two people, but a public occasion, a shared spectacle in which everyone, from the wealthiest landowner to the humblest shepherd, finds a place. The narrow lanes leading toward the church are alive with movement, feet crunching over gravel and packed earth, skirts brushing against hedgerows, boots splashed with the remnants of last night's rain, the air rich with the scent of damp soil and wood smoke curling from the chimneys of cottages left untended for the morning. Neighbors pause to greet each other along the way, the older ones exchanging knowing looks as if to say they've seen dozens of such days, and yet still relish the way they pull the village together, while the younger ones chatter in eager voices, speculating about what the bride will wear, whether there will be music, and most importantly, how much food will be set out once the vows are said. From the edge of the fields, farmers wipe their hands on rough woolen tunics and join the slow, steady procession toward the heart of the village, their faces ruddy from the wind, while behind them children skip along, their bare feet muddy, their hair windswept, caught up in the pure joy of a day that promises diversion from the ordinary rhythm of chores. Those who live farther afield have begun their journeys earlier, arriving with cloaks still damp from the morning mist, carrying small tokens or gifts wrapped in cloth perhaps, a bundle of herbs for the household, a piece of carved wood, a jar of honey gathered from their own hives, offerings meant to bring good fortune to the couple's new life. Merchants from the nearby market town, if they have any connection to the families, might make an appearance as well, their finer clothes setting them apart from the more work-worn attire of the villagers. But even they seem to loosen under the warm tide of celebration, exchanging nods and smiles freely. The churchyard becomes the gathering place, its low stone wall dotted with those who lean casually while waiting, its grass trodden into narrow paths by generations of such gatherings, and above it all the church itself stands, solemn yet welcoming, its door thrown wide, the faint smell of incense drifting out into the open air. Conversations ripple through the crowd, half-remembered tales of the bride's childhood, proud comments from the groom's relatives about his skills or character, and, inevitably, whispers about how well or poorly the match was made. For even in celebration, the human habit of weighing and measuring the choices of others is alive and well. Children chase each other between the skirts and boots of their elders, earning fond scoldings when they get too close to the neatly arranged garlands hung along the church doorway, these made of whatever flowers and greenery the season allows, daisies and rosemary in the summer, perhaps ivy and holly in the winter, each tied with strips of cloth to add splashes of color. For many of the guests, this is one of the few occasions in the year when they see everyone gathered in one place, and so the greetings are long full of embraces and hearty claps on the shoulder of news exchanged about distant relatives, poor harvests, and unexpected blessings. For the poorer families, it is also a rare chance to taste food beyond their usual fare, and they look forward to the feast with an almost childlike anticipation, already imagining the platters of roasted meat, the loaves of bread still warm from the oven, the jugs of ale that will be passed from hand to hand. There is a shared understanding that today's work can be set aside, fields will go untended, looms will stand still, and for these few hours the village will be united not by labor but by joy. As the appointed hour draws nearer, a subtle shift runs through the crowd, voices lowering in expectation, eyes glancing toward the lane where the bride and her attendants will appear. while at the same time others look toward the opposite path, where the groom will make his way, perhaps accompanied by his closest friends or kinsmen. Their steps steady, but their hearts surely quickened by the moment. A small group of musicians, if the families can afford them, stand to one side, tuning their instruments, the twang of gut strings and the soft testing notes of a pipe weaving themselves into the background hum of conversation, ready to lift the moment into song when the time comes. And yet, beyond all the visible preparation, there is an invisible thread that binds these guests together, a sense that by bearing witness, they are part of something that will be remembered long after the garlands have withered and the last crumbs of the feast have been cleared away. For in the oral memory of the village weddings live on in the retelling, "Do you remember when so-and-so married?" woven into the fabric of who belongs here, of which families are tied to which, of what alliances and friendships were sealed with the exchange of vows. As the bells ring again, fuller now, their sound carrying out over the fields to reach even those who could not attend, the crowd shifts toward the church door, the hum of voices falling to a quiet that is not solemn but reverent. A shared pause before the heart of the day unfolds. Some guests step inside at once, eager to claim a good place from which to watch, while others linger at the threshold, reluctant to give up their place in the open air, just yet savoring the moment when expectation still hangs unfulfilled in the space between them and the bride's first appearance. Above them, the sky has cleared, a patchwork of pale blue and drifting white, and for a fleeting moment it feels as though even the weather has joined in the celebration, granting a bright, gentle light to bathe the scene, a light that will catch on the gleam of polished brooches, on the gold thread of a gown's embroidery, on the smiling faces of those who have come not just to see but to belong, if only for a day, to this shared story. The moment the first glimpse of the bride appears at the far end of the lane, the murmur of the gathered crowd changes, a wave of voices softening into that distinctive hum of shared anticipation, as though everyone instinctively knows to hold the scene gently in their gaze. For in the medieval world, the procession to the church is not a simple walk but a symbolic act, a passage that binds the private promise of marriage to the public recognition of the community, and every step is watched, weighed, and remembered. The bride, flanked by her attendants, moved slowly, not because she is reluctant, but because this is the way it is, done at pace deliberate, giving those along the route the chance to look closely, to admire, to whisper, and perhaps to judge. Her gown is not always white, in fact. It rarely is, for in this age, white cloth is expensive and impractical, so she wears her best, whatever color or fabric that might be, perhaps a deep russet wool trimmed with fur if the weather is cold, or a soft blue if the dyer in town has done well that season, the fabric falling heavy around her ankles, lifting just enough with each step to show sturdy leather shoes that have been freshly cleaned. Her hair is arranged with care, braided or coiled beneath a veil if she can afford one, and adorned with flowers or ribbons that sway gently as she walks. Beside her, the women who attend her sisters, cousins, close friends carry small tokens, sprigs of herbs meant to ward off ill fortune, lengths of cloth that may later be given as gifts, or simply their own presence as a shield against any stray ill will. For superstition runs deep, and the journey from home to church is considered a vulnerable time. Somewhere behind or to the side, a young boy may carry the bride's small coffer of personal possessions, a visible sign of what she brings to her new household, though for poorer families this might be little more than a simple bag with a comb, a knife, and a few changes of linen. Ahead of them, if music has been arranged, the musicians begin to play their tunes, not the grand compositions of court, but lively village melodies that ripple out over the crowd, the drum marking the pace while the pipe or fiddle lifts. The mood, the sound, drawing those who have lingered on the edges to come closer and join the moving procession. From the opposite direction, the groom makes his own way toward the church, accompanied by his friends or kinsmen, his steps brisk but not hurried, his attire also his finest, perhaps a tunic of well-dyed cloth, with a belt that has been polished until the buckle gleams, and if his family has some means, a cloak lined with fur or edged with embroidery to show that this is no ordinary day. There is often a quiet pride in the way he carries himself, though it may be mixed with a trace of nervousness that only his closest companions can read in the set of his jaw or the quick flicker of his eyes toward the path ahead. Depending on custom and local tradition, the bride and groom may walk separately and meet at the church door, Or they may join midway, the moment of their meeting, greeted with cheers or the playful teasing of friends. As they move together, the path itself becomes a kind of stage lined with those who have stepped away from their homes or work to watch the older folk offering blessings aloud, the younger ones calling out jests, children darting in and out of the procession's edge until they are gently soothed back. The ground beneath their feet might be strewn with herbs such as rosemary or meadowsweet, their scents rising as they are crushed, both to honor the couple and to ward off ill spirits. In some places, handfuls of grain might be tossed toward the bride, a gesture meant to wish her fertility and a prosperous household, though in truth it is as much a bit of mischievous fun as it is a blessing. The houses they pass bear small signs of participation, windows draped with bits of colored cloth, thresholds swept clean, a jug of ale or a plate of bread left where passing friends might take a piece, for hospitality on such a day extends beyond the feast itself. As the procession draws closer to the church, its pace sometimes slows even further, as if the weight of the moment presses gently on those within it, reminding them that this is not only a day of celebration but of solemn change, that the steps they take now are the final ones before the vows are spoken and the course of their lives set. The church, visible now in the near distance, seems to grow taller, its tower a steady marker against the shifting clouds, and the sound of the bells carries more clearly with each passing moment, their tones overlapping with the music and the murmurs of the crowd, until the whole village seems to be enclosed in a single weave of sound. Those who have gone ahead stand at the entrance, waiting to see the couple arrive, their faces a mixture of joy, curiosity, and the mild self-importance that comes with having secured the best vantage point. And when at last the bride and groom reach the churchyard, there may be one final ritual before they step inside. Perhaps the giving of a token from one to the other, perhaps the exchange of a brief word or glance that only they understand, or in some places the symbolic knocking at the church door before it is opened to them. In that moment, the movement of the morning pauses, the procession's journey ending where another will soon begin, and the quiet that falls over the gathered crowd carries both the weight of tradition and the fragile shimmer of new beginnings. Inside the cool, shadowed stone walls of the medieval church, the world outside its muddy lanes, excited children, and whispering neighbors falls away, leaving only the hushed anticipation of those gathered and the solemn rhythm of ritual. For the church ceremony was the heart of the wedding, the moment when all the careful planning, negotiations, and preparations converged into a binding act before God and the community. And though we might imagine a brief service with a few prayers and the exchange of a ring, in reality the ceremony was a layered, highly codified performance, steeped in symbolism and expectation, beginning often with the priest standing at the entrance to greet the bride and groom separately, ensuring that both were ready and willing. For consent was crucial, and even the slightest hint of reluctance could cause the priest to pause, questioning them gently and reminding them of the seriousness of the step they were about to take. For a medieval marriage was not only a social contract but a sacred obligation, and those who entered it casually could face censure or, in extreme cases, the annulment of the union, though such outcomes were rare. For most couples approached the altar with a mixture of excitement, nerves, and a clear understanding that they were about to commit themselves publicly. The bride would often kneel first, attended by her closest female relatives or friends, adjusting her gown and veil in the dim light that filtered through narrow, stained windows, the colors of the glass painting the stone floor in muted reds, blues, and greens, and the priest would bless her with holy water, a simple gesture meant to purify and protect, while incense, if available, filled the air with a sweet, pungent aroma that lingered in robes, hair, and the folds of the gown, reminding all present that this was a holy act. The groom, standing at the other side, might adjust his tunic and cloak, the subtle scrape of leather boots against flagstone echoing softly in the tall nave, and he too would be sprinkled with holy water, both partners now physically marked as entering a sacred covenant, their roles delineated by centuries of tradition yet flexible enough to accommodate the customs of local parishes. When the couple finally approached each other at the altar or at the church door, depending on local custom, the ritual reached its first critical point, the exchange of consent, spoken aloud in words that were carefully dictated by the church. And though we often assume that the words themselves were formulaic, there could be variation depending on language, region, and status. from simple declarations of "I take you as my husband, wife," to longer affirmations invoking God's witness and blessing. And the act of speaking these words publicly transformed the private promise of the betrothal into a legally and spiritually recognized union, witnessed by all present. Rings, though not universal in every parish, were often blessed by the priest before being placed on the bride's finger, sometimes on the groom's as well, the circular shape symbolizing eternity and the unbroken commitment they were making. And in wealthier churches the rings themselves could be finely wrought of precious metals, set with stones or engraved with the couple's initials, while in humbler parishes they might be simple bands of iron or bronze, their value lying not in material but in symbolism. Throughout the ceremony, the congregation might be encouraged to respond with prayers, murmurs, or simple acclamations, binding the community not only as witnesses but as participants in the act. For in the Middle Ages, marriage was understood to exist within the social web, its success dependent as much on neighbors, kin, and fellow parishioners as on the feelings of the couple themselves. Hymns or chants could accompany the vows, their melodies simple yet resonant, filling the high-ceilinged nave with sound that wrapped around the stone columns and carved wooden pews. And if music was unavailable, the rhythmic reading of scripture or recitation of prayers provided a cadence that marked each stage of the ritual, from the blessing of the couple to the prayers for their future children and household. The priest's words often included reminders of the roles. Each partner was expected to play the husband as protector and provider, the wife as helper and homemaker, both bound to fidelity, piety, and mutual support, reflecting both theological beliefs and the practical realities of medieval life, where survival, property, and reputation were intertwined with the domestic sphere, and where children were seen as both blessings and necessary contributors to the family's continuity. After the vows and blessing, other small rituals might follow: the joining of hands, the lifting of a veil, or the presentation of gifts such as a small coin or token from one family to the other, all of which served to reinforce the seriousness of the commitment and the tangible link between the two households. In some regions, symbolic acts were included to ensure fertility or protection from ill fortune, from the scattering of grain to the sprinkling of water, reflecting the mingling of Christian ritual and older folk practices that persisted in local custom. Finally, the ceremony concluded with the priest's final blessing, sometimes accompanied by a mass, sometimes simply a short prayer, sending the newlyweds forth into the community with the authority of both God and the Church, their hands now clasped not only in love or duty, but in law and sacrament. And as they descended the steps or moved back through the doorway, the congregation often erupted into cheers, claps, or ringing of small handbells, a sonic celebration that echoed in the stone walls and spilled out into the open air, mingling with the morning breeze and the scent of crushed herbs that had been scattered along the path. The bride and groom might then pause briefly to acknowledge family members, perhaps exchanging a few whispered words or glances before making their way out into the light, the world outside now permanently altered by their union. For the medieval wedding was a bridge from private preparation to public recognition, from the measured, cautious negotiations of the betrothal to the vibrant, communal celebration that would follow. And it was here, in the church itself, that the gravity, joy, and sacredness of the day were fully made manifest, the culmination of months or even years of planning, anticipation, and careful arrangement, leaving all who witnessed it with a memory that would be retold around fires, at tables, and in future gatherings, ensuring that the story of this marriage became woven into the living tapestry of the village and beyond. After the solemnity of the church ceremony, the village and the families turned their attention to the part of the day most anticipated by all, the wedding feast. For in medieval times, the feast was not merely a meal, but the tangible heart of the celebration, a stage where families displayed their wealth, generosity, and culinary skill, and where the community came together in ways that combined both spectacle and sustenance. The location could vary, depending on the couple, as stations. Some feasts took place in the great hall of a noble house, its long wooden tables polished and covered with cloths, if the family could afford them, banners hung on walls to declare the union of two houses, the floor strewn with rushes to absorb spills and add a faintly fragrant softness to the hall. While in smaller villages, the feast might be held outdoors or in the local inn. Long trestle tables assembled hastily but with care, the simple backdrop of timbered walls and thatched roofs serving as a charming frame for the gathering. The arrangement of seats was a careful matter, with the bride and groom placed at the head of the table, often on a raised dais or at a slightly longer table to mark their importance, and beside them sat their immediate families, while guests of honor were assigned seats closer to the couple, and the rest filled in according to social hierarchy, age, or kinship. For even at a joyful occasion, medieval sensibilities demanded that rank and relationship be acknowledged, if only subtly, through the placement of elbows and the length of the meal. The table itself, once laid, was a visual feast, often as impressive as what would later appear on the plates. 4 platters and bowls were arranged with a sense of symmetry and pageantry, sometimes decorated with greenery, small figurines of bread, or fruits arranged in pyramids, all designed to convey abundance and good fortune. The food varied depending on wealth and season, but even modest feasts had a surprising variety compared to daily meals. Loaves of bread, dense, crusty, and sometimes flavored with herbs or spices, formed the base of the meal, alongside meat cooked in numerous ways, from roasted fowls such as chicken, goose, or swan for the wealthy, to more humble cuts of pork or beef for those less fortunate, and stews that simmered slowly in large cauldrons, flavored with the limited but carefully chosen spices available through trade, mingling with the earthy sweetness of root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and parsnips. Pies were common, though not always sweet, filled with meat, fish, or sometimes eggs, their crusts thick and sturdy, meant as both container and part of the meal. And for those who could afford it, sweet pastries dusted with sugar or honey provided a hint of luxury. Beverages flowed freely, for ale and mead were staples of the medieval diet, often consumed warm in the colder months, while wine appeared for those of higher status, imported from distant regions and served in goblets of wood, horn, or metal, its deep colors gleaming in the sunlight filtering through windows or the torches flickering in a hole. The act of eating itself was ceremonial, for communal consumption emphasized the shared joy of the occasion, with servers sometimes professional, sometimes neighbors drafted for the task, moving along the tables bringing dishes to each guest, filling cups, and ensuring that no one went hungry. It was not unusual for entertainers to appear alongside the meal, for feasts were as much about spectacle as they were about food. Minstrels or fiddlers might play gentle tunes that allowed conversation to flow, while jugglers or acrobats performed for moments of distraction, and in some of the grandest halls, jesters moved among the tables, offering playful commentary or gentle mockery, their antics accepted as part of the communal revelry. During the feast, there was a rhythm to the proceedings, from the first ceremonial toast to the bride and groom, often performed by a respected elder or the host, to the successive rounds of dishes, each marked by the passing of platters and shared laughter, interspersed with toasts and speeches, sometimes solemn, sometimes humorous, often containing advice, good wishes, or gentle reminders of the responsibilities now entrusted to the couple. The youngest children might nibble quietly on scraps at the table's edge, while older youths helped carry plates or refill cups, learning the rituals of hospitality and observation, their presence both practical and symbolic, for they represented the continuity of family and village life, the next generation absorbing the lessons of social hierarchy, decorum, and celebration. For the bride and groom, the feast was both exhilarating and overwhelming, a sensory flood of sounds, smells, and textures, as they were passed from table to table, presented with gifts, questioned by curious relatives, and applauded by neighbors, each gesture a subtle affirmation that their union had been witnessed, acknowledged, and supported by the community. The act of feeding one another, particularly the first bite shared from the same plate or cup, was a common ritual, a way to publicly display the couple as new status as partners in both sustenance and household management, and it also offered an opportunity for playful mischief sometimes. A bit of gravy or a crumb might be smeared teasingly, a minor jest in the midst of ceremony. The atmosphere, though joyous, was also punctuated with subtle reminders of social rules and expectations, for even in the most celebratory moments, medieval people were acutely aware of rank, obligation, and the eyes of the community. The feast could last for hours, stretching into the afternoon and early evening, as multiple courses were brought forth and consumed, each followed by a pause, a toast, or a brief performance. the ebb and flow creating a rhythm that carried the guests along as though caught in a communal tide. When the meal finally drew to a close, there was often a ritual of clearing, a slow dispersal as people offered final congratulations, prepared for the next part of the day, perhaps dancing, or retiring to quieter corners to converse privately, reflecting on the morning's ceremony and the abundance of the feast. The taste of roasted meat, the sweetness of honeyed bread, the warm glow of ale and wine lingering in their bellies. And in this long, shared experience, the community not only celebrated the union of two individuals, but reaffirmed its own cohesion, its values, and its traditions, ensuring that the memory of this day, the sights, the smells, the tastes, the sounds, and the laughter would be carried forward, woven into the stories told around fires, recounted at market gatherings, and preserved in the collective memory of the village for years to come, so that every bite of bread, every toast raised, every note of music played, became part of the enduring tapestry of what a medieval wedding was truly like. Once the long tables have been cleared and the last crumbs of bread swept into baskets, the wedding shifts from ceremony and feasting to a more boisterous, playful stage. For in the medieval world, the day was not complete without games, dancing, and entertainment, and this is when both the young and old found a release for their energy, laughter spilling into the air as freely as the music. The village square, hall, or courtyard becoming a theatre of human joy where customs, competition, and community converged. For games served not only to amuse but also to teach, to test skills, and to honor the newlyweds in ways both symbolic and practical. One popular activity might involve tossing small coins or apples, watched by cheering neighbors as young men and women tried to catch them, testing reflexes and luck, while others competed in playful wrestling matches or contests of strength such as arm wrestling, feats that demonstrated vigor, promise of future protection for the bride, or simply the ability to partake in communal amusement. And the sounds of cheering, clapping, and shouted encouragement created a hum of excitement that rose above the faint clatter of dishes being washed or benches being moved to make space for dancing. Dancing itself could be structured or spontaneous, sometimes led by a musician or fiddler who called out the steps in time to the tune, and sometimes completely improvised, the participants weaving in and out, couples linking arms, hands clasped in polite or teasing grips, swirling in circles, stomping, hopping, or moving in chains and lines that stretched across the hall or courtyard. The motion keeping energy high and feet warm even in the chill of autumn or early spring, and the rhythm of movement punctuated by laughter, playful jostling, and occasional minor stumbles that were met with gentle teasing rather than scolding, for in this context, imperfection was part of the charm. Masks and costumes could make an appearance, particularly in wealthier households or during feasts that coincided with seasonal festivals, adding layers of drama, humor, or allegory to the dance, while in simpler settings the joy came from the creativity of participants, perhaps a woven garland tossed between dancers, a ribbon twirled through hands, or the clever mimicry of a jester or musician who encouraged the crowd with mock challenges or rhyming commentary. Storytelling and jesting complemented physical activity, for the entertainer's role was to keep spirits high and imaginations engaged, weaving tales of legendary heroes, absurd mishaps, or exaggerated accounts of the couple's families, sometimes playful, sometimes cautionary, always enlivening the proceedings. And in some villages, a traveling minstrel might arrive to provide songs newly learned from distant towns, their melodies fresh and unfamiliar, a novelty that sparked curiosity and applause, while local performers added familiar refrains that everyone could sing along to, joining voice and movement in a communal chorus that strengthened bonds and created a shared rhythm to the celebration. Another common feature involved symbolic games reflecting fertility and prosperity, such as the Cupid's dart, where small objects like pins or beans were tossed toward a target representing the couple, or the lifting of the bride and groom in mock trials of strength, their friends or family hoisting them onto tables or shoulders. The exaggerated display meant to inspire laughter while quietly invoking wishes for endurance, vitality, and long life together. Children played their own versions of games nearby, chasing one another around benches and tables, darting in and out of dancing circles, and occasionally being invited to participate in minor ways, like holding ribbons for a maypole-like dance, retrieving coins tossed for amusement, or simply clapping along. their bright, unrestrained energy providing a visual echo of the joy adults felt in more formalized ways, and reminding everyone present of the cycle of generations that the wedding helped to continue. Throughout these activities, food and drink remained available, not in the structured way of the feast, but casually. A loaf or two of bread passed among participants, ale or mead replenished in jugs, small cakes or sweetmeats offered to reward winners or to quiet those waiting their turn, all contributing to the overall feeling of abundance, indulgence and collective delight, as no medieval celebration would be complete without some attention to the senses beyond sight and sound. Sometimes competitions were staged between neighboring villages or families, particularly in wealthier areas, with prizes ranging from a small coin to a carved token, or simply the honor of having bested friends and relatives in public. Each victory and loss, woven into the ongoing stories that would be retold long after the sunset, forming the oral history of the community in the same way as the details of the ceremony and feast. Music continued to underpin these events, the fiddler or pipe player adjusting tempo as the games demanded, speeding up for dances of excitement, slowing to provide suspense for contests, the sound rising into the rafters or across the open yard, mingling with the laughter, shouts, and occasional off-key singing of participants, creating a chaotic yet harmonious oral tapestry that defined the wedding day in a way that words alone could not convey. For the bride and groom, this portion of the day could be dizzying, for while they were the focus of attention, they were also participants, moved from dance to game to toast, smiling, bowing, and occasionally participating in mock competitions, each act reinforcing their roles as central figures, while also reminding them of the communal nature of marriage, that it was not simply an agreement between two people, but an event sustained, witnessed, and celebrated by all present. And as the afternoon wore on, the air grew heavy with the mingled sense of food, sweat, and herbs. The bright light of day softened into golden afternoon, and even the most boisterous participants began to tire, slowing their movements, pausing for refreshment, exchanging quiet words or laughter as the rhythm of the day shifted toward evening. Yet, in this gradual winding down, the sense of shared accomplishment, joy, and spectacle remained, for every jest, every dance step, every tossed coin or spun ribbon had contributed to the creation of a memory that would endure in the village, a story retold around hearths, in inns, at market gatherings, and in later weddings, so that the games and dances themselves became as much a part of the social fabric as the vows and feasts, binding the community together through laughter, movement, and the simple, enduring pleasure of celebrating life and love in human company. As the sun begins its slow descent, and the golden light of late afternoon softens into the cooler hues of evening, the medieval wedding gradually transitions from the boisterous joy of the feast and games into the more intimate, reflective phase of evening traditions and send-off rituals. For in this period, the conclusion of the day was as rich in symbolism and meaning as the ceremony itself, and it is here that the couple, their families, and the community move from public spectacle toward private acknowledgement of the life now beginning together. Often, the transition begins with a quieter meal or simple refreshments, lighter fare than the earlier feast, sometimes bread and cheese or small pastries, accompanied by ale, wine, or mead, allowing those who remain to gather in smaller groups, exchange whispered congratulations, recount the day's events, and reflect on the blessings and advice offered by elders. For even in celebration, medieval society valued the wisdom of experience and the passing of practical counsel to the next generation. During this time, certain evening customs take shape depending on regional practice and family status. In some areas, the couple might participate in a ritual bath symbolic of cleansing and renewal, their friends and relatives assisting in its preparation or quietly observing the practice, while in others, small religious ceremonies or prayers are said within the hall or a private chamber, invoking God's continued protection over the marriage, health, and fertility of the bride and groom. A particularly widespread tradition involved the escorting of the bride to a new home or chamber, often accompanied by a small procession of close family members or friends who would carry torches, lanterns, or candles to light the path. For the journey from her family home to that of her husband was symbolic of her leaving one household and joining another, a step laden with both anticipation and solemnity, and sometimes accompanied by singing, gentle chants, or spoken blessings, ensuring that the movement was both joyous and meaningful. Along the way, neighbors and guests might throw handfuls of herbs, grain, or petals, acts meant to promote fertility, prosperity, and protection from misfortune. The fragrant scents mingling with the cool evening air and the faint smoke of hearth fires already lit in the surrounding homes, creating a sensory reminder that the life of the couple was now bound to the wider community. Once inside the new home or chamber, additional customs awaited. In some places, the bride might be seated on a special bed draped with fine linens and cushions, the fabric itself sometimes embroidered with symbols of prosperity or fertility, while the groom presented her with gifts, perhaps a ring, a girdle, or a small token from his family as a visible sign of his commitment and the merging of their households. For families of greater means, the evening could include small, private entertainments, minstrels playing softly to accompany quiet conversation, storytelling that recounted heroic or cautionary tales of marriage, or gentle games that allowed participants to reflect on the day while celebrating its conclusion. And these moments, though less public than the morning's festivities, were no less important, as they provided both the couple and their witnesses with a sense of completion, a moment to savor and internalize the day's significance. For villagers and guests not intimately involved in these private rites, evening often meant the gradual dispersal, though the sounds of laughter, song, and conversation lingered in doorways, courtyards, and along streets, and the act of leaving the celebration was itself a ritualized process, with final congratulations, farewells, and small tokens or gifts exchanged, reinforcing social bonds and ensuring that all participants felt acknowledged and included in the conclusion of the event. In some traditions, the send-off included the symbolic extinguishing of candles, the closing of hall doors, or even minor ceremonial acts, such as lifting the couple over a threshold or showering them with more herbs and grain, each gesture reinforcing the transition from one stage of life to another, embedding within the mundane acts of movements and touch a layer of meaning that would be remembered and retold. By the time night has fully settled, the streets quiet, the air cool, and the last guests departed, the newlyweds are left in relative privacy, though still surrounded by reminders of the day, the lingering scent of herbs, the warmth of firelight on walls, the scattered remnants of food and drink, and the faint echo of music and laughter that seems to linger long after the musicians and revelers have gone, all of which contributes to the creation of a sacred, almost liminal space where the couple can reflect on the promises made and begin the practical work of daily life together. In this way, the evening traditions and send-off serve multiple purposes simultaneously. They honor the couple, mark the passage from one social identity to another, provide closure to the community's participation, and preserve the memory of the wedding as both a personal and communal event, ensuring that the day is not merely a fleeting moment, but a story to be carried forward through households, generations, and the oral histories that give medieval life its enduring texture. And so, as night deepens and torches gutter in the quiet rooms, the last gestures of blessing, song, and playful ritual quietly fade into the rhythm of ordinary life, leaving behind a sense of completion, connection, and anticipation for the life that is only just beginning. Beyond the feasting, games, and ceremonial formalities, one of the most tangible aspects of a medieval wedding was the exchange of gifts and the careful arrangement of the dowry. For marriage in this period was as much a matter of social and economic negotiation as it was of personal affection, and understanding the material and practical dimensions of the day reveals a great deal about how people lived, planned, and sustained themselves. The dowry, typically provided by the bride's family, was far more than a symbolic gesture, representing a carefully calculated contribution of land, livestock, money, or household goods intended to support the couple in establishing their own household, and its contents varied greatly depending on social standing, wealth, and local custom, ranging from a simple bundle of linens and utensils in poorer households to elaborate collections of cloth, jewelry, silverware, and even pieces of land for those of noble or affluent families. Each item recorded and sometimes witnessed in legal or ecclesiastical documents to ensure fairness and to protect the bride's interests in case of widowhood or marital dispute. Alongside the dowry, gifts from the groom's family also played an important role, often intended both to welcome the bride into her new household and to demonstrate the family's status and goodwill, ranging from small coins and rings to livestock furniture or fine fabrics, each piece chosen with care to balance generosity, practicality, and social signaling, for no one wished to appear stingy or careless in such a public and highly scrutinized occasion. And yet, excessive displays could provoke envy or resentment, requiring a careful hand in presentation. These gifts were often exchanged or displayed during the feast or at private moments in the evening, sometimes ceremonially, with the bride and groom acknowledging receipt, at other times quietly, as part of the household arrangements being set up for their future life together, and in either case, the objects carried with them layers of meaning, signaling family alliances, expectations, and the resources available to sustain domestic life. Practical household goods formed a large portion of the dowry, particularly for families of moderate means. Woven linens, woolen blankets, cooking pots, utensils, and sometimes a loom or spinning wheel. All essential tools for daily living in a world where self-sufficiency was prized and labor largely performed within the household. In wealthier homes, the dowry could include finely embroidered cloths, silver candlesticks, carved wooden furniture, or even small libraries of religious texts, each item carefully chosen to reflect both piety and social status, and in some regions these gifts were paraded or displayed publicly, allowing the community to witness the bride's contribution and reinforcing the notion that marriage was a partnership sanctioned by both families and society. The ritual of presenting and arranging gifts often had its own subtleties. Linens might be counted aloud, coins weighed and displayed in the presence of witnesses, and certain items deliberately positioned on or near the bride's sleeping area or in the main hall to symbolize her central role in the new household. While small personal items, such as jewelry or combs, could be tucked away as keepsakes or tokens of affection, bridging the public and private dimensions of the marriage. Gifts from friends and neighbors were another layer in this network of support. Sometimes simple, an extra loaf of bread, a jar of honey, a basket of eggs, or a small carved wooden toy for future children, but no less meaningful, reflecting the community's investment in the couple's success, their willingness to participate in both celebration and ongoing practical support, and the expectation that the new household would be integrated fully into village life. For couples whose families were landowners, livestock could play an outsized role, with cows, sheep, or pigs gifted to provide immediate sustenance and a source of income, their presence in the household marking both wealth and stability. And these animals were sometimes blessed or ceremonially acknowledged in the presence of witnesses, reflecting a mixture of superstition, religious belief, and practical concern. For a wedding was also a moment to ensure the couple's prosperity in a tangible, observable way. Legal and social obligations intertwined with gifts and dowries, for in many cases the exact composition and delivery of the dowry were formally recorded, and disputes could arise if agreements were not upheld, making the process as much a matter of contracts and negotiation as of ceremony, and highlighting the degree to which medieval marriage functioned as both a personal and institutional arrangement, binding not only the couple but their families and communities. Beyond these material concerns, gifts often carried symbolic weight. A knife or spindle representing domestic skill, a fine cloth for future children symbolizing fertility and care, or a book of prayers invoking spiritual guidance, each item speaking to the expectations placed on the couple in their new life together. And the stories these objects generated were retold in households and villages, forming part of the oral history of both family and community. As the evening progressed and the gifts were displayed, arranged, or stored in the couple's new household, there was also the task of integrating them, practically a process that could involve the participation of extended family servants or neighbors, for the physical labor of setting up a household was as important as the ceremonial acknowledgement of the dowry, and it served as another form of social reinforcement, reminding all present that marriage required work, cooperation, and an understanding of daily needs, alongside the celebration of love or alliance. Finally, the combination of dowry gifts and practical preparations formed a bridge between the joyous rituals of the day and the long-term realities of life, ensuring that the newlyweds had the means, support, and community acknowledgement necessary to begin their partnership successfully, and leaving the couple, their families, and the wider village with a sense of accomplishment, security, and shared investment in the life that was now beginning. For, in the medieval world, the tangible elements of marriage The objects, the resources, and the labor invested were inseparable from its emotional, social, and spiritual dimensions, making every gift, coin, loaf, or spindle both a practical tool and a symbol of continuity, protection, and hope for the future. As darkness settles over the village, the last echoes of laughter, music, and conversation fade, and the medieval wedding enters its final, most private stage. The nighttime rituals that surround the couple's first night together. For while the day has been filled with public ceremony, feasting, and celebration, the evening carries an entirely different weight, blending expectation, superstition, and deeply ingrained social norms. And in this period, the transition from public to private was handled with great care, ceremony, and, often, anxiety. The bride, now in her new household, is guided by female relatives or attendants to her chamber, where the bed has been prepared with care, often draped in linens from her dowry, cushions and blankets arranged to demonstrate both comfort and the skill of her household, while candles or lanterns are lit to provide sufficient illumination in a time before electric light, the flickering flames casting shadows that animate the room and hint at both mystery and promise. Before the couple is left alone, there are sometimes rituals meant to ensure fertility, protection, and marital harmony, for medieval belief held that the first night was a liminal moment where both good and ill fortune could influence the entire future of the union, and thus small acts, charms, or blessings were common. Herbs such as rue, rosemary, or lavender might be placed under pillows or around the bed, coins or rings positioned in symbolic patterns, and prayers or whispered words of caution and encouragement offered by those who assisted in the preparations. In wealthier households, the priest might have offered a blessing earlier in the day, but even here, family members often repeated prayers or recited scripture, quietly ensuring divine favor and warding off malicious spirits, while in simpler homes, the rituals might be entirely oral or improvised. Relying on local tradition, the knowledge passed down from mother to daughter over generations, each gesture weighted with the belief that careful attention to these small acts could secure the happiness and productivity of the marriage. Privacy itself was a complex matter, for the concept of marital privacy existed alongside the expectation of oversight. Attendants often lingered at the threshold, offering guidance, instructions, or reassurance, and only departed when certain the couple was ready, creating a delicate balance between supervision, education, and respect for the new household's autonomy. And even after the door was closed, the sounds and stories of the chamber were never entirely secret, with neighbors and families speculating about the first night and the bride's conduct, reinforcing social norms and expectations in ways both subtle and persistent. The rituals surrounding the consummation of marriage were intertwined with superstition, for medieval people believed that the timing, preparation, and moral behavior of the couple could influence fertility, the health of future children, and the overall prosperity of the household, leading to a variety of curious practices. Some families insisted that the bride and groom eat certain foods believed to strengthen virility or fertility. Others recommended specific bedtime arrangements or positions, and in certain regions, small charms, tokens, or even inscriptions on the bedposts were employed to ensure protection from evil spirits or witchcraft. While these practices might seem odd to modern eyes, they were taken seriously, and the psychological effect on the couple was profound, as they moved from the long, structured day of public attention to the intimate expectation-laden space of their chamber. Carrying both excitement and anxiety for the first night symbolized the transition from ceremony to daily life, from promise to action, and from childhood dependency to adult responsibility. Beyond the physical and symbolic preparation, the first night often marked the beginning of negotiation between the couple themselves, for even arranged marriages required communication, compromise, and mutual adjustment. And though love might not have been the foundation of the union, attraction, desire, and companionship became essential in sustaining the household, and the night offered the first chance for these dynamics to emerge in private, away from the gaze of relatives, neighbors, and clergy. While contemporary accounts vary widely, it is clear that medieval couples navigated a complex mixture of expectation, social pressure, superstition, and personal discovery, and the rituals and charms, while seemingly quaint, were part of a broader framework of belief and practice that reinforced the seriousness, sacredness, and potential vulnerability of marriage, ensuring that every action, every word, Every placement of a candle or herb carried meaning. As the night deepened, candles burned low, the room grew quiet, and the couple, guided by both tradition and personal instinct, settled into the rhythms of the chamber. Aware of the significance of this first night, not only for themselves, but for their families and community, and the lingering scents of herbs, the soft rustle of fine linens, and the faint residual sound of celebration from the streets outside, all contributed to a sensory environment that was both intimate and symbolic, a space where the transition from public ritual to private life was enacted, remembered, and, in its own way, celebrated. The first night, though physically brief in the span of a lifetime, carried immense symbolic weight, marking the culmination of ceremony, feasting, gifts, and social acknowledgement, while simultaneously beginning the daily negotiation, cooperation, and shared labor that would define the couple's life together. And as sleep finally descended, the couple resting amid the carefully arranged rituals, the herbs, the blessings, and the careful preparation, the medieval wedding concluded in a quiet, profound intimacy that echoed the structured, communal, and symbolic richness of the entire day, leaving both participants and observers with a sense of completion, continuity, and the hope of prosperity and happiness in the years to come. As the first night draws to a close and the medieval wedding reaches its natural conclusion, the village, hall, or household returns slowly to its usual rhythm. The noise of celebration replaced by quiet conversation, the soft crackle of dying fires, and the occasional murmur of those still awake. For while the day has been filled with ceremony, feasting games, dancing gifts, and private rituals, its memory lingers long after the final guests have departed, leaving a sense of communal achievement and personal transition that is difficult to fully capture. And yet it is precisely in this lingering that the essence of a medieval wedding is found. For every stone of the church, every plank of the hall, every loaf of bread, every tossed coin, every dance step, every whispered prayer, every carefully arranged gift and dowry, every flickering candle in the bride's chamber, and every charm or blessing carries forward into the stories, the customs, and the history of the village. Families exchange final farewells with hugs, handshakes, or gentle bows, acknowledging not just the union of two individuals, but the weaving together of households, lineages, and social networks. And the newlyweds themselves emerge from the first night with an awareness of responsibility, continuity, and hope, ready to face the daily labor joys and trials that will define their shared life, while the community retains the memory of the day as a collective experience told and retold over firesides, markets, and gatherings, ensuring that the wedding's impact resonates far beyond its temporal confines. As the morning approaches and the streets grow quiet, the remnants of celebration's scattered petals, strewn rushes, lingering scents of herbs and roasted meats serve as silent witnesses to the day's events, small markers of memory that villagers will recognize for weeks and months to come, each one a symbol of connection, continuity, and the delicate interplay of personal, familial, and communal life that characterized medieval society. Historians and storytellers alike note that medieval weddings were never simple affairs, and yet in their complexity lies their beauty, for they combined the sacred and the social, the practical and the symbolic, the joyous and the solemn, creating a ritual that celebrated not only love, alliance, and fertility, but also social cohesion, moral instruction, and continuity of tradition. And while modern audiences might imagine a single moment of ceremony or a short party, the reality was a day and, sometimes multiple days woven with layers of meaning, careful planning, shared labor, and communal joy, leaving participants and observers alike with a sense of involvement in something larger than themselves. A collective act that both reflected and reinforced the values, beliefs, and rhythms of medieval life. As we reflect on these rituals, the vows, the feasts, the games, the gifts, the nighttime rites, we begin to appreciate the intricate web of expectations, beliefs, and practices that surrounded marriage, from the meticulous preparation of the dowry to the symbolic gestures in the bride's chamber, from the joyous noise of dancing and jesting to the quiet, intimate prayers for protection and prosperity. And through this reflection, we can better understand not just how people celebrated weddings, but how they navigated life, family, and community, making each ceremony an enduring testament to human creativity, belief, and connection. So as the village settles, as the last candle burns low, as the new couple begins their shared life with hopes, fears, and anticipation, We too can close our eyes, imagining the stone walls, wooden beams, flickering flames, laughter, music, and whispers, and feel the weight and wonder of a day that was at once ordinary and extraordinary, personal and communal, solemn and joyful. A day where the mundane and the magical coexisted in perfect balance. And with that, dear traveler, we bid you good night, carrying with you the echoes of a medieval wedding, its stories and lessons, its joys and rituals, safe in the knowledge that though the past is gone, it continues to live in memory, imagination, and the timeless human desire to celebrate connection, life, and love. So sleep well until we meet again, carrying with you the whispers of history, the laughter of long ago celebrations, and the soft, enduring glow of candlelight over stone, wood, and hearth.